masters, masters, masters of change.
Hello there. Welcome to Masters of Change. My name is Kim Cunio, and I'm the head of music at the Australian National University, and I'm here with my good friend Charlie Hogg. Charlie, as you may know, is the director of the Brahma Kumaris here in Australia. Charlie, welcome again.
Thanks again, Kim. Good to be back.
Well, Charlie, we go through themes, and it's really beautiful that we go through a theme and we explore it really till we feel that there's nothing more to say. And we have a new theme for a number of episodes that I must say, when you came up with this idea, I got quite excited because it's something we all hold. It's beliefs. So before we look at specific things, why do we have these strong-held beliefs when we come into these bodies?
You know, Kim, I feel on the spiritual journey probably the most powerful challenge or obstacle is these beliefs we hold about ourselves. You know, often we feel it's other people who create problems in my life, but it's often these deep-held beliefs, and I think they're the construct of my childhood and even past life perceptions about who I am. So if over a long period of time I hold this belief that I'm not good enough, you know, no matter how well I do, the belief is stronger than what is really happening in my life. And so often we just really dance to the tune of our beliefs about ourselves. We create a reality inside our head, which isn't really reality.
Charlie, this sounds a bit like what I've heard described as the inner critic. Is that what you're talking about?
It is, Kim, actually. I mean, it's amazing, isn't it, that inner critic, he seems to sit back here, somewhere in the back of the brain, and is always putting you down. And it's amazing that, really, I think you and I have touched on this quite a few times, that to me, talking to thousands and thousands of people on the spiritual journey, the biggest challenge is to remove this belief that I have no value, or that I'm not good enough, or I'm inferior. It is so profoundly etched in our psyche. So that reality distorts my relationships. Every part of my life, actually, every single part of my life is influenced by this lack of self-respect.
Charlie, one thing I often think about with beliefs is how this insidious ego comes into it too.
Yeah.
So it seems like the ego is always going for too much or too little. You know, like we get to this point, either we think we're too good and we have that delusion of that we're the centre of the universe, or we just put ourselves down. How do we get a middle path in our life?
Well, actually, in one way, beliefs are my ego, because my original self is the soul. And the more I adopt an external persona based on my temporary identity, I start to adopt all these false beliefs about myself, which after a while just become my reality about who I am. And they can be a false belief, a sense of superiority, but mostly they're built around a sense of inferiority most of the time, in my experience anyway.
Yes, and even when people appear to be superior, or thinking about that, we know that there's often that little void inside, isn't there? So they're sort of pretending to overachieve, to fill up this sort of space of nothingness. Is that something you've seen in people?
Absolutely. You know, it seems to me it's almost inversely proportional. The more you put out the persona of being something or being better than, it's covering up the sense of emptiness, or the sense of inferiority, or the sense of lack of self-respect. So the more the void in here, the more I try to build a persona out there to cover up the sense of, the sort of the extreme lack of self-respect in here. I build this extreme ego out there to sort of cover it up. And so the fear, a huge fear that people will see through that veneer, that facade, and see what I'm really like. That's a huge fear that we have the more ego I build.
You know, Charlie, it does make me sad. I must say, we're not, you know, and of course it's a passing thing, but to think that we fall into this abyss so easily.
Yeah.
And, you know, when you were saying that, I was thinking about the two greatest traps, and is one the accumulation of things. It seems like, and the other one is, I don't know, it's this idea that we have to keep doing more and more and more, and a normal amount of achievement isn't enough. We have to be smarter, we have to be faster, we have to make more money. And this idea of just, as you said, it's building up an edifice in case someone can see through it.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a bit sad, but surely you have a solution, I think.
It is sad, but it's sort of, it's a body-conscious culture that we've created. And it seems to me, Kim, that the more the emptiness inside, the more the void, which perhaps the contemporary word is depression, that sort of horrible feeling inside of sort of an emptiness, a meaningless, I'm living my life, but there's no real meaning. So what do? I just sort of, to do something externally to give me a temporary hit. I accumulate. And I think once in one of the previous episodes, you and I were saying that one of the main ways of dealing with a temporary or depression is just to go shopping. Shop till you drop. And it's a documented psychological result of depression is to go and shop. You get a little bit of high that fills the emptiness temporarily. So you start to record this thing inside that when I shop and I get a bit more outside, it is making me feel better. So you keep doing more of it and you accumulate so much.
So really, it comes down to the central teaching you've been giving us in all these episodes, that on some level we need to come to terms with the simple truth that this body is not real.
Well, it's real, but it's not me.
That's right. But it's not my soul, is it?
Yeah, and Kim, it's so amazing, isn't it, that the ramifications of this one, I sometimes feel that stress, when you really boil down stress, it's change, it's a whole lot of things, but it's when I base my life on falsehood. When the whole foundation of my life is that I'm a temporary body, that builds all this anxiety, like we were just saying, of trying to be something I'm not. So many layers of anxiety and stress come because I've built my life on this absolute falsehood that I am a temporary body, I'm a male, I'm an Australian, I'm this, I'm that, and this whole persona is actually just the one I'm acting through. It's really like I'm in a play. I, the soul, am the actor, and this is the costume in the drama of life. That's the reality of life. Shakespeare was spot on.
He sure was. And who would want to be? I mean, it's a bit of a bleak existence to think that you only get one go in this thing that is inevitably going to fail.
Yeah.
It's an incredible thought. I mean, in some ways, it's like so many things in our society. We've just taken it for granted because we inherit it like a belief, don't we, Charlie? But really, it's absurd on one level. It's absurd to think that we could be made of something that will degrade within 60, 80, definitely 100 years into nothingness.
Yeah, so. It is amazing, Kim. And, once I heard a British scientist, and he was studying, he was a mainstream scientist, he decided to study reincarnation. And when he told his British scientific community, they said, what a waste of time, everyone knows it's not true. And then he went to India to continue his study, and the scientists in India said, what a waste of time, everyone knows it's true. Because, half the world's population has some sense or an idea of reincarnation, all the Buddhists, all the Hindus. 30% of Christians in America believe in reincarnation. So there's some belief in the continuity of the self, but not a real understanding of what it is.
And even if that belief hasn't been formalised for a lot of people, this idea that we are a soul and we evolve, I think this is a very, very integral belief for so many people.
Yes.
Because if we look at every religion, no matter what religion you've come from, at some point whether you're a soul seems to be discussed.
It does. And not only that, all the indigenous cultures, all the First Nations people have absolutely deep idea that we are souls. I think it's more in the contemporary world that we seem to have moved more and more to a material paradigm of our existence, that we're just a temporary material being, and consciousness comes from the brain, whereas we would say consciousness is actually the soul. And the soul, when the soul leaves the body, we call it a dead body. And a few times in my life that I've viewed bodies of family members or people I've known really well, it's amazing because it's just like, the life has gone. In fact, I went to view my brother. My brother died. He had 3 little daughters, and his youngest daughter, who was like about 3 or 4, when she came to view his body, she touched him and she sort of went like this, Daddy's gone. Like she could just feel the body was perfect, but the soul had disappeared. The consciousness, whoever it was she loved and connected with, had disappeared, had gone.
And Charlie, some cultures seem to get this much easier than others, don't they? And of course, many of our viewers are either Indian or have been to India many times. And it seems like even in the mainstream of Indian thought, there's this feeling that the body is temporary.
Yeah.
There's almost a type of rejoicing on one level when we leave the body, and a slight sadness when we come into a body. Which seems to be the opposite of the Western mode, which is let's celebrate when someone is born, and then let's be in denial, and then very, very sad when they die.
And we seem to have built a whole culture built around the fear of our mortality, and even in death, we just pretend. We just don't want to acknowledge death, and yet I think it's such a healthy thing that in spirituality we understand this incredibly natural process of the soul adopting a body, leaving a body and taking another one. And I just find the process absolutely fascinating. At the point of death, the soul goes into the womb. When the quickening begins, so when the mother movement, around anywhere I think 4 to 6 months, mothers out there will know, the movement begins. That's when the soul enters. And the soul brings its vibrations. Some mothers, when they're pregnant, blossom. They're absolutely like they radiate. And imagine, because you actually have another soul with its consciousness. And sometimes they even say in India that the soul remembers its past life, when it's in the womb. And even after it's born, have you noticed little children, sometimes they're playing and they just go glaze over. And it's like they've travelled somewhere. And you know what they say sometimes when the people of their last life are remembering them, it's pulling their thoughts because they've had a connection with that soul. And even that soul has had a connection with its past too. And so it's a fascinating, it just makes so much sense to me, but I respect what everyone believes.
Of course, but really what you've said, Charlie, is that, there are some big beliefs we need to confront. One is this belief that we are the body, and the other belief is that we will suffer at the time of death.
Yeah.
These are big beliefs to think about,
Yeah.
And I wanted to say to everyone, of course not all deaths are easy. I've seen quite a lot of people leave the body, and I must say probably in 50% of the times, it's been unbelievably beautiful and peaceful.
Yeah.
But I have seen people struggle with the letting go of the body because sometimes there can be great pain in the body, but that doesn't mean that after the soul has left the body that there was any distress at all. Would that be how you see it?
Yeah. And Kim, there was one beautiful woman in Canberra actually, and her husband was a Christian minister. And she used to come to our meditation centre, the Brahma Kumaris. And she was quite sick. She had an operation. And during the operation, she was relatively elderly. She left her body. She told me. She felt she left her body. And she said she saw the light. You know how a lot of people say, this light. They see this beautiful light of God, so to speak. And she said she felt quite comfortable. But she could feel her husband and her son, their vibrations pulling her, because the surgeon had gone and told them that there was touch and go. She said it was a tangible feeling. She came back to her body. But she just said it made me understand so deeply that I'm a soul. She had such a deep experience that I'm actually a soul and that I will continue my journey. And she said it was a really pleasant experience moving out of her body. She said it wasn't fearful and it wasn't uncomfortable. But when I hold on to the attachment, and in this case she said those who had known her and loved her were pulling her back and weren't really... And she even said to them, I wanted to move on in my journey, but you wanted me to come back.
Yes, this is incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we can read some of those stories of near-death experience. Many are documented now, and there's a number of books. And so it's something where Charlie and I aren't here to tell you what to believe, of course, but we are to say to you, we must examine everything. Is that really what it's about, Charlie? We shouldn't accept what we're told by society on any level. We've got to be the experimenters of our destiny.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Kim, because I often feel on the spiritual journey there's 3 steps. Knowledge, belief, and experience. Now, belief and faith can be wonderful, but we're also talking how belief can hold me back completely. And belief can distort my perception of reality. We're taught this belief is real, but actually it often isn't. So that's why I think real spirituality is to experience for myself. Let me experiment in the laboratory of my mind who I am. In my own experience when I've meditated, I've really felt like I'm a bodiless soul, just sitting lightly. And in that experience, I've really sort of almost understood the journey of leaving this body, that it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal at all. But because the belief that society has given us that death is the worst thing, we've set up an entire medical industry in denial, in a sense, that, and almost death is failure, but it's inevitable, but it can be seen almost as failure when someone dies, because you and I understand, and I'm sure you do to a certain extent, Kim, that the karmic story dictates when I have another set of accounts and I'll leave a body and go to another set of accounts. That's my understanding of the soul's journey.
Yes, Charlie, this is a beautiful thought. Now, I remembered once seeing a very fine, actually a Sri Lankan doctor who I think we have both seen in the past. And he once, with a twinkle in his eyes, said, "Kim, you have a very serious condition." He said, "Actually, it's a fatal condition. I'm very sorry to tell you." And he was smiling. And I said, "Well, what is it, doctor?" He said, "It's life." And he just wanted to make the point that his role as a doctor, it's not like a mechanic on a car that will inevitably fail.
Yeah.
And I thought this is such a beautiful way. We can eat well, we can delay the onset of old age by maybe doing some asanas, by eating well, by sleeping well, by having less conflict. All these things we think are very important to do. But the fundamental truth is that whatever body we have in the 20s will not look anything like that by our 60s or 70s or 80s. That the body is in itself a mechanism doomed to fail.
Yeah. And in saying that too, we love it, don't we, and respect it, because it's almost this wonderful vehicle which I can connect with life and with people, but I care for it, and is that wonderful sort of wisdom to care for it and look after it, but not really be attached to it, because I think the more attachment to the set of labels in the body, that's where this deep fear of death, which is such a powerful belief in our world, Kim, this deep, we're absolutely indoctrinated that death is bad and death is failure. And yet life, if you see everything, huge beautiful trees grow but they die, but new ones grow. Everything goes through this process of creation, sustenance, death or destruction, but the creation's happening. It's the nature of the material world.
So from this episode, it's almost like we need to make a belief substitution to be really happy. On one level it's substituting the belief of the body for the soul, but also the belief in the temporary to the eternal.
Yeah.
And I think this is very, very exciting. If we can believe that we are eternal, we are bound to this planet. We are bound to this cosmos. So we will become the carers of this beautiful planet.
Yeah. That I really love what you said, because I think at the heart of the shift of spirituality is to love that which always exists. And really, if you love anything temporary, attach your heart, you will build that fear into your life. But when I begin to enjoy everything, but love the soul, love God, Love those things which are permanent and understand that the only permanent thing is change. That wonderful sort of paradox. The only permanent thing in life is... And when you just realize that's our journey, that's the story, we enjoy it rather than want to hold on to everything which is happening around.
Charlie, I must say I've loved this conversation. And for those of you who are listening, please, we've got quite a number of episodes on belief, and you can see, I think we're both quite excited by this topic because it gets into the reality of who we are in this here and now, and it influences us in the things that matter in our lives, whether it's our work, whether it's our parenting, whether it's our being children. It will inevitably be a big part of our lives. But we're at that time, my favourite time. I have to ask you always, Charlie, can you take us on a meditation?
It's my pleasure, Kim. Thank you. Let me sit in the awareness of my eternal self, the immortal self, the one who always is. Let me visualize the eternal self, the soul, the consciousness entering this body and sitting lightly in the forehead. This is a wonderful instrument to express myself through. But the reality is that it is temporary. I, the permanent self, use the temporary self. When I understand this, I can enjoy a fearless life because I understand at some point I will fly from this costume and take another. But when I forget this, often the older I get, I build fear into my life. Fear of what will happen. Fear of leaving that which is known. Fear of where I will go. And yet, spirituality says, I create my future by the quality of actions I do now. So when I live with self-respect, treat others with respect and kindness, when I leave my body, I will go to a good home. Let me practice the awareness of being a soul and practice that I, the soul, am deathless. I will continue. And I will take my good actions and my good character and my virtues with me. The more I practice soul consciousness, the more realize that I always exist. I start to resolve the mother of all fears, the fear of death. Each time I meditate and I become soul conscious, I'm step by step breaking down this fear. Om Shanti.
Charlie, what a beautiful commentary. This is a really big thing for us, for all of us to open the door to really consider what it is to be a soul, which is to confront that fear of death, that deepest of beliefs that holds us back. We're not saying you have to change your beliefs right now, but be the experimenters of your sacred lives. Charlie, myself and Shivani and everyone, we wish all of you self-love, love of God, love of this drama Charlie talked about. Everything will always change. Isn't this an incredible thing, that the one stable thing in our universe is that it will never be the same? So as we get into our episodes on belief, we ask you to believe in yourself. Om Shanti. Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you, Kim. Bye-bye.